Hello and welcome back to the 7 Skills for the Future podcast series. I'm Emma Sue Prince and I'm joined by my producer James.
Hello everybody.
Welcome to the show. So today I want to focus on one of the 7 skills, just to recap what they are. So we have adaptability, critical thinking, empathy, integrity, optimism, being proactive and resilience.
So, Emma Sue, which of the skills are we going to talk about today?
Well, today, James, I want to focus on critical thinking. And these days, critical thinking, when you ask people what it is, they'll tend to think of it as philosophizing, writing essays, looking at things from different perspectives, problem solving, and so on. And I think a lot of us will be very familiar with that kind of skill from studying or from education. But I think critical thinking now is much more a process. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of understanding and expressing ourselves. It's being able to really apply that reasoning, that analysis, that observation, reflection into everything. And critical thinking also has links to being more empathetic and better at your relationships. And it's also linked with being reasonable, rational, and approaching things in a calm way. In terms of future skills, as in 7 skills for the future, critical thinking is much more about quite complex problem solving. So we need to get a lot better at dealing with problems without having all the information and having to problem solve quite quickly, and maybe with some uncertainty and ambiguity around the problem. It's also very important for active learning, for fluency of your ideas, and for your creative skills. So it's really about leveraging your brain's ability and capacity to be creative, to have ideas, and really be able to flourish and contribute in the moment. So that's kind of different to how one might traditionally think of critical thinking, I think.
So we clearly need to change the way that we understand this idea of critical thinking. But why do we need to do that today, do you think?
Well, I think now it's much more about being able to deal with quite complex problems. We have a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity around some of the decisions we might have to make. So critical thinking is really important there. We also tend to make assumptions very quickly about lots of different things. And that's why it's important to use our critical thinking skills to challenge some of those assumptions that we ourselves make. It's also about your ability to learn actively, to have fluency of your ideas, and really leveraging your brain's capacity to be creative. So people don't often think of critical thinking as being creative, but it does actually have a big impact on your ideas and your creativity in general. And also, I think, recent research and what neuroscientists are looking at is that our brains actually can be rewired and trained every single day. So that, I think, is also part of critical thinking, because we might sort of assume that we can't do something or can't learn something, but actually our brains definitely have the capacity to do that. So for me, it's a must-have skill. But one big issue with critical thinking actually is that, our education system and graduates today, they don't come out with these critical thinking skills. They don't really learn critical thinking, even in the traditional way anymore. And so I think that means we are in the middle of a critical thinking crisis. So we all need to sharpen those skills much, much more.
So I guess a big element of this today would be the influence of technology on our critical thinking skills. What would you like to say about that?
So technology has a big impact on our critical thinking skills because, we've become much more used to quite a light approach in how we deal with information. Information is coming to us in lots of different ways, and our brain has to find a way of making sense of it all. So one of the ways that our brain will do that is through categorizing things and through quickly making assumptions. So the way that we look at information online, for example, contributes to the speed in which we make judgments and how we perceive some of that data. So we may not be necessarily looking at it in an accurate way. Another big issue is ability to pay attention. And that is becoming less and less because we are so tied into our technology and to using technology. And so we are constantly distracted, and we allow ourselves to become distracted very, very easily. And that will have an immediate knock-on effect on our ability to think critically. So one of the things I often ask people is to think about the last time that they've used social media, and to deliberately think about something that they've seen on social media or something that they've been reading on social media, and how quickly they will believe it. So they'll believe it at face value. They won't question it. They'll just believe it and quickly maybe type a comment underneath. And I think that's where we kind of just need to be a lot more aware of how we are receiving information and how we're judging that information.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people would assume there's a generational element to this, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. Would you agree with that?
I don't think it is. I think it affects everybody because we're all using technology. So I know some people might say, oh, yeah, young people, their attention span is next to nothing because they're always online. But actually, it counts for all of us. So it doesn't matter what age you are. If you're using technology and if you're using social media and just being online, which most people are a lot of the time, or on their phones, it will impact that part of your brain. So it has nothing to do with how old you are.
Yeah, and I find from my experience that as a teacher that it's actually adults that seem to find it more difficult to control themselves to resist the temptation, whereas teenagers seem to have more discipline because they're used to being in school all day.
Well, we don't have any rules, do we? So, adults don't have rules around how they might be using technology. And I guess I would argue that we need to create rules for ourselves in how we use it. And that can help.
Which is interesting at the moment because I know that Apple have recently added to their operating system that it actually tells you how much you're using your device and how much screen time you've been using, or sends you a graph of how you've been doing it. So maybe it's going to become easier. I don't know.
Well, I've got mixed feelings about that actually, because I think in some ways we need to kind of step up and take responsibility for how we're using our phones, rather than have an app tell us or give us that information. For example, it's why can't we just switch our telephone off for particular points of the day? Yeah. That's just an easy thing to do, but we don't do it.
It's true, yeah. And how do you feel about the kind of, maybe you could call it the bonfire treatment of just sort of getting rid of everything from your life, getting rid of all of these apps and social networks and everything, going, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that as a remedy?
Well, I have to say I often feel tempted to do that myself, but I think it's not a remedy. I think it's a bit extreme. I think actually what we need to do is learn how to manage our technology. And actually I believe that young people are becoming better at that because they've grown up with it. So they're having to do that. So it's really that we need to manage those distractions because that's the problem with it. It creates all these distractions and has a knock-on effect. So it's not just about how often you pick up your phone. It's also about how your attention span will change. So your ability to sit and have a conversation with someone for longer than 5-10 minutes can be challenging because we're just not used to paying attention for that long. And
I suppose from a critical thinking point of view, it's your awareness of what you're going through.
Yes,
is a big part. Having this awareness, right, is a big part of how we interact with technology.
Yes, it is, and I think with critical thinking, one of the sort of sub skills of critical thinking is the ability to reflect, and to have a more reflective approach to life and to issues and everyday problems and everyday situations. Is just to kind of step back and reflect, and that will strengthen your critical thinking skills the more that you can do that.
Okay, so maybe we can think now about a practical situation where these critical thinking skills would be useful. So if I can give you a situation that I've dealt with in the past, maybe you can give me some advice about how I could have dealt with it better. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was thinking about something I've seen a lot, and I imagine a lot of other people have as well, is when you have meetings. Mm-hmm. It's quite common that in a meeting you have certain people who participate a lot more than other people. They kind of dominate the discourse that's going on there. And I've known from my experience that there are people who've got really good ideas and would have really worthwhile contributions who don't necessarily get the opportunity to participate because of the nature of this meeting, the people dominating.
Yeah.
So with critical thinking in mind, what could I have done to help make my meetings more productive?
Well, I think this is where I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that critical thinking's got a strong link with empathy. So I think this is where empathy comes in, because this is about really bringing an awareness into that meeting. So it also depends, of course, who's in charge. So if you're in charge of the meeting, it's different to if you're a contributor to the meeting. But let's assume that you're in charge of the meeting and you're aware that some people are dominating and other people are not. You need to bring empathy into that. So that includes being aware of people's body language, for example, and how they're contributing. So if somebody's dominating a meeting, sometimes that could be for all different reasons. It could be that they actually feel quite insecure and therefore they feel they have to kind of get in there first and make their point first. And so it's important to look at body language. I always would say, look at people's body language and how are they sitting, how are they standing, how are they communicating, and then look as well to see the people who perhaps aren't contributing, what's going on with them. Are they bored? Are they distracted? Are they on their phones? What's the protocol in that meeting about use of technology? I would also add into that. And then I think if you're in charge of the meeting, it's really about taking charge, actually, and encouraging those contributions from people, or changing the tack of the meeting and saying, right, let's just, let's look at one particular idea. And maybe if you have a flip chart, you can sort of put that idea up on the flip chart and just invite people to brainstorm different things. There's lots of different ways that you can enable people to participate more in a meeting. But a lot of it will be around your ability to be present and your ability to actually kind of get inside what might be going on for people in that meeting. What are the positions of people? Have you got people from different departments there? Perhaps they don't know each other very well. And really going with your instincts around what might be happening, and then doing something that can sort of change the course of that meeting. And I think that's about, it's easy, again, with critical thinking, it's easy to make assumptions that somebody's shy or, somebody's arrogant because they are dominating the meeting. But actually, it could be the opposite, completely the opposite.
Okay, great advice. Thank you. Do you have any other suggestions for ways we can bring critical thinking into our lives? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, one of the big things I think is questioning your assumptions about things, because we do it so quickly. So critical thinkers are really curious. They look to find what's behind everything and, why things are the way they are. So I think, when you're presented with something, it's just being a bit more forensic about it and not, try to work out where assumptions are being made. So to be more aware of that, getting more into the habit of adopting different perspectives. If you're with other people, how might they be viewing something? Ask lots of questions. So that's one of the best ways to use your critical thinking skills, is just to simply ask more questions rather than accepting something at face value. And things like building in more reflection time. We feel like we never have enough time to reflect, but to really try and bring that into any kind of decision-making process. And you can do that with other people as well, just to bring that reflection time in, bring it into your day. So just things like, taking time at the end of the day to write down what went well, what could you have done differently during that day, is a wonderful way to strengthen your critical thinking skills. Yet, most of the time we don't do that kind of thing at all. I think, be more aware of how you're responding to information, especially information online, just to be much more aware of that rather than just accepting it, accepting what somebody says to you. And I think perhaps one really great way to build your critical thinking skills is simply just to read more, to do a lot more reading and have more in-depth conversations with people, and just be open for learning and open for learning something new.
Excellent advice. Yeah, I think there's a lot for us to work with there. Okay, I think that just about brings us to the end for today, don't you think?
Yeah, I would say that, as with all 7 skills, it's really about finding ways to introduce these things into your everyday life. Don't wait for that meeting to use the skill. Use it the next time somebody asks you a question or says something to you. So if you want to get more ideas about critical thinking, you can look on the website, mentor.com. But the best way is to pre-order a copy of the book, 7 Skills for the Future, published by Pearson Business. It's coming into all major bookstores, online. Pre-order it at Amazon. Get your hands on it. It's going to have all the advice you need to help you develop these skills, which are crucial for your happiness, for your work, for your well-being. So thank you very much for listening. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, 7 Skills for the Future. Thank you very much, James, and see you next time.